Okay, so this is special considerations for poetry when doing literary analysis. The first thing we look at is rhyme. Some poems rhyme, some don't. A lot of times we think of it as just sort of a quaint little thing that poets do, but a lot of times the idea behind a rhyming poem is to tell the reader that two lines need to be looked at together. So line 1 and line 2 might rhyme, and that's obvious, but if line 1 and line 9 rhyme, that might be the author giving you a clue as to how they're connected. So here are some of the different kinds. And if you see anything in red here, that means that there's a link to a poem type later on in the presentation that you can just click on and go to, and there's your example. So the first one is free verse, or a poem that doesn't have any set meter or rhyme. This is something that kind of came around in the 20th century where a lot of the rules got ditched, and instead of having meter, which is the beat, or rhyme, as we all know what that is, you can just write anything you want. We examine this pretty infrequently in here just because it's very hard to do when you're trying to talk about style if the style is a lack of style. End rhyme is what we're all used to. It's where one line ends with a rhyme. I will not eat green eggs and ham, and rhymes the end of the next line. I will not eat them, Sam I am. An internal rhyme is where multiple rhymes within a line rhyme with each other. She sells seashells down by the seashore. An I rhyme is two words that rhyme by sight but don't rhyme by sound. So if I were to say here, H-E-R-E, and air, an old Shakespearean word meaning before, E-R-E, by sight they rhyme because they're one-syllable words that both end in E-R-E, but they don't sound the same. A near rhyme is when two words are close in sound but not exactly the same. So, for example, you might have seam, S-E-A-M, and seen, S-E-E-N. They're near rhymes, but since the M and the N are different, it doesn't work. Also, if a word has multiple syllables, so if I said careen and then seen, it would be a near rhyme because there's an extra syllable in one of the words the other one doesn't have. A quatrain is a rhyming four-line stanza. Usually we're going to see this in a sonnet form. So that means that the first and the third and the second and the fourth lines are going to rhyme with each other. A couplet is two lines that rhyme with one another, like the Sam I Am example. Meter is the beat of the poem. Now, a meter is registered in a metric foot, or two syllables, usually one stressed, one unstressed. So 1 foot would be 2 syllables. So when you're talking about meter, you're always talking about, or most likely talking about, 2 feet at a time. So for our purposes, we're most likely looking at iambic pentameter. Now an iamb means it's an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. We don't say it like that, but it does go up and down. And it's just used most likely because it's a natural speech pattern. It's how most of us talk anyway. Pentameter is 5 feet or 10 syllables. If the meter is 2 syllables and you have, or 1 foot, and you have 5 of those, you have 10 syllables. Blank verse is just simply unrhymed iambic pentameter, and this becomes important because this is what Shakespeare uses a lot. Forms. So now this is going to go into 2 different categories. This is how something's written, what it looks like, versus content, what it talks about. For our purposes, we're going to look at both, and sometimes a poem can fit both of these. So for example, in the Bright Star poem you're going to read by John Keats, or hopefully have already read, it's going to fit 2 of these. Now the first one is a sonnet. It's a 14-line poem that's written in iambic pentameter. It has a particular rhyme scheme. So the way it breaks down is you have 3 sections, or 3 quatrains, that have an every other line rhyme pattern. So it goes A, B for the first quatrain, then it picks up again with C in the second quatrain going C, D, then it picks up in the third quatrain with an E, F. And even if they're not physically separated, we know that they're 3 separate sections because of that rhyme scheme. The last 2 lines are going to be a couplet. A sonnet is almost like an argument in poetry form. So the first line tells us something about an argument or a question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? The poet then spends the next 7 lines going over why or why not this is a good idea. So for example, in the Bright Star poem by Keats, he asks, should I be as steadfast as the star? And then describes how solitary and observing the star is. At line 9 is what we call a turn, where the author either goes with his idea or turns against it. For Keats, he turns against it and he says no. And the reason he says no is because he doesn't want to be solitary, he wants to be with his lover. And in lines 13 and 14, they draw it all to a conclusion. They wrap up the idea, and that's what he does. An elegy is a contemplative poem, usually about someone who has died. And if you go to the example, I've given you both a poem and a video of the reading. Think of it like a eulogy. It's written for somebody who has, just the same way, just as though it were a speech being given, but in poetic form. One of the most famous elegies is "O Captain, My Captain," which Walt Whitman wrote about the death of Abraham Lincoln. A lyrical poem is just any short poem that expresses personal thoughts or feelings of the speaker. So a sonnet can be a lyrical poem, or a lyrical poem could be a free verse poem. It doesn't really matter what the format is as long as it's expressing personal thoughts and feelings. So it's kind of the big category of poem. An ode is a form of poetry to meditate on or address a single subject or condition. So you'll see this a lot of times where an object and a moment in history or a condition are talked about, and they're usually symbolic of something else. So, an ode to my Air Jordans is not really about Air Jordans, but representative of something else. The Air Jordans just are the symbol. A villanelle is a very technical one. I'm going to let you read this yourselves, but the idea being that it has repeated refrain. So there'll be lines repeated over and over again, which are thematically important. So here's an example of a free verse. Here's an example of a sonnet, Sonnet 18 by Shakespeare. An elegy, a lyrical poem, an ode, and a villanelle. If you have any other questions, you're always free to ask, but hopefully this has helped.